Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Joey today. Joey's an individual that I've been in touch with for a while. He's a retired outdoorsman, avid fisherman, and a survival tech instructor from out there in the great state of Oregon. Welcome to the show today, Joey. How's it going?
Going good today. Thank you for having me on today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting to have this conversation for a while. I remember you telling me about at least one of your encounters is in an area I've kind of been looking into recently. So definitely, can't wait to have the chat today. But, Joey, I'm going to go ahead and give things over to you. Feel free to take us back when this all started happening to you out there and then what you experienced along the way.
Okay, sure enough. So as I've been recounting my many adventures in the outdoors, of course, there are two that stand out. The two times I've actually seen a Bigfoot in 1979 and in 1995, 95 being the encounter that really shocked me, I have to say. So, but I'd like to go back even farther. When I was a kid, I grew up camping a lot with my mom and dad and sister, mostly in Eastern Oregon. I was born in 1960. My dad was 47 years old when I was born. He's an avid ham radio operator. He actually holds the world record for Morse code transmission that was set in 1942. I just Googled that recently, and sure enough, the AI came up with his name. I was really proud to see that that's still a world record today. Anyway, he would take us camping and set up his ham radio rig wherever we camped, a lot in the Ochocos mountain range in Eastern Oregon outside of Prineville. There's a lake there called Walton Lake. I've been going there for 50 years. Never had a sighting there or anything happening Bigfooty at that lake. But northeast of there, there's a lake called Delintement Lake. And back in the 60s, it was very difficult to get to. Gravel road, potholes, and four-wheel drive type stuff. But it was a favorite haunt of my dad's because he was also an avid deer hunter. And we'd go up there in July or August, and he would scout for mule deer for the fall hunt. And so one year we were up there. We had been at Walton Lake a few days. The fishing was no good, so we headed over to Delintement. About a mile or two from the lake, we're inching along in our old Ford pickup up this road, and I'll never forget this. A doe jumps up onto the road. It was on a hillside. It jumps up onto the road, and it's got 3 arrows sticking out of it. And they're all festered, and it's limping. It's in horrible shape. Back then, compared to nowadays when they have these high-tech crossbows or compound bows and things like that, it was a lot less of a sure thing hunting with a bow and arrow. Anyway, my dad was not for hunting in that fashion back then. He was a rifle hunter. So we stopped to pick up, and he reaches under the seat and pulls out his big handgun. I don't know what it was, and went out and followed the deer up the hill a little way and put it out of its misery. So that was the beginning of an eventful trip there. We arrived late in the evening, and the next day fished all day. My mom and dad had their sleeping bags and sleeping arrangement inside the canopy of the Ford pickup. And my dad had brought a pup tent, Army issue pup tent for my sister and I. My sister's 6 years older than me. And he set that up for us in the campground. The other odd thing is we were the only ones camping there that weekend. And so it was kind of I remember it being kind of an eerie feeling, Usually there were other campers wherever we went. I would find somebody to play with, or at least, you felt like you weren't isolated. But we were the only ones there. And the second night we were there, we'd gone to bed. My dad had put extra logs on the fire so that we could see inside the tent. The firelight was light up the inside of the tent for my sister and I before we fell asleep. He made a habit of doing that wherever we were camping. So the fire's going real good. And my mom and dad retire into the pickup. I hear the door close. I remember thinking, okay, time to sleep. And we're laying there, and my sister and I hear something walking into camp. And we're, thinking, wow, we haven't been in the tent that long. And it's probably a deer. There's also elk there and black bear, although we'd never seen any black bear in that campground. So we're laying there, and I remember laying on my back. This is in 1970, so I'm 10 years old. Laying on my back, and it's walking right by my side of the tent. My sister's laying on my right side. So with my left hand, I reach up to bang on the wall of the tent to scare it off, and it hits something solid. If this is a deer, I've just hit this deer right in the side. And you would think that if you hit a deer in the side, it would go running off, right? Well, this thing didn't run off. We could hear it take a few steps, and there's excitement in the tent now, and my sister's sitting up, and she gets out of her sleeping bag to peek out the zipper, the front door of the tent, and screams and falls back onto her butt and just starts yelling for my dad. Dad, 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 come here, Dad, Dad. And I don't know what's going on. So canopy opens up. My dad jumps out. He's over at the tent door within seconds. What's going on? What's going on? And my sister says, there was a man standing by the fire. And now I'm really freaking out because we're the only ones there. And I remember thinking, where did this person come from, and what are they doing in our camp? And my dad's milling around. He goes back to the truck and gets this big one of those big old-fashioned flashlights that took the 6-volt battery. He's shining it through the woods and walking around outside the camp. We don't see anything. And comes back, and my sister's telling my dad that he had a suit on. And I'm thinking like the kind you wear to church. And she says, and that's what my dad said, like a suit? And she says, no, like a fur suit, Dad. And now I'm wondering, why is there a man in our campground wearing a fur suit? None of this is making sense. We all settled down and got out. We all got out. My mom got out of the truck, and we're all around the fire for a little bit. I think I remember her making something for us to eat to calm down. And then my dad says, I think we're all going to try to fit into the canopy tonight. So we got our sleeping bags out of the tent and jumped in the truck and, stayed in there with him that night. Next morning, wake up a little bit late, and Dad's packing everything up. He's already taken the tent down. And we hadn't even blown up our rubber boat yet. We just got out of there, went back to Walton Lake and stayed another night or two there. There was a lot of people camping there. Never really talked about it with him. I've never even talked to my sister about it any more than if I ask her about it, she'll just say, I have no idea what that was, but it was standing up. And that must have been what I hit in the side with my hand. So that was the first thing. Again, I didn't see anything. All I know is that it was terrifying, and especially for my sister. And again, very bizarre occurrence.
You were so young as well. That morning, the next morning that you woke up, you said your dad was packing stuff up. Do you remember anything out of place about the campsite, or like any footprints or anything, or just a thing you might not have really been looking for at the time?
No, the only thing I can really say it was different is Dad had his handgun in his holster. He was wearing it. and he never wore his gun. We had it. There was always a pistol and a rifle available, but he never packed it or, had it open carry, so to speak. It was always tucked away. He had a locked box that he kept underneath the seat of the truck that the pistol was always in. And I thought that was kind of weird, like he was ready for action. But again, there was still no one camped there. And when we left the campground vacant. There was no one there after we left. But no, I don't remember him looking for footprints or anything like that. He didn't see anything. He just going by what my sister said. And, she's 70 now and still claims, I don't know. She'll say, I don't know what that was. Not really avoiding talking about it, but it was just for a brief second that she noticed something standing by the fire and fell back into the tent screaming, which apparently scared it off. But that's a pretty remote area over there. And there's been other sightings, since then in that area, especially, in the Blue Mountains just east of there. And yeah.
And I know this happened a long time ago, but when you hit the side of the tent and you hit something hard, did it feel like there was any like it had any cushion to it, or how you have something that has a lot of like fur or hair, so that you wouldn't just be hitting something that was really hard? There might be a little cushion when you hit it.
Yeah, there was a little bit of cushion, but thinking about it now, if I could recall it, the best I can describe it would be like with the back of your hand hitting the side of a cow or a horse, that kind of feeling. So I don't know if it was squatting down, or it didn't feel like whatever it was, I'd hit it in the leg. In fact, I can remember distinctly thinking I'd hit this thing in the side, and there's not a very, very tall pup tent that we were in, just a little 2-man tent. But it's been so long ago, Jeremiah, I don't know if I'm right or not, but it seems like I'd put my arm up and hit the side of the tent towards the roof of the tent. So maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And it didn't run off. Yeah.
So really, really interesting introduction to the subject for you. How did that affect the rest of your time growing up?
Well, it didn't. It didn't even occur to me, or it didn't have any effect on me wanting to be an outdoorsman. Soon after that, when I was 12 years old, I think I joined a hiking group called the Shemeketans here in Oregon, and took many outdoor or backpack and hiking trips with that group. As soon as I got old enough to drive, I started talking whoever would go with me into backpacking and camping. As soon as the snow melted, enough, I was always in the woods and never looking for Bigfoot, thinking about Bigfoot, always more concerned about black bears. I can't say that I have a phobia about bears, but I've heard enough stories and seen enough things to be very wary of bears and cougars. There's a lot of cougars in Oregon. And I've got a buddy who had a close call with one hunting, actually 2 close calls hunting with cougars. So that's always been my concern. But no, it didn't ever change my protocol or keep me from wanting to go into remote places, not in fear of Bigfoot or anything like that.
So then, as you continued to grow up into adulthood, what would you say the next thing that you had experienced would have been?
Well, I've kind of got it in chronological order here.
Okay.
So this is a strange one. In 1980, I was in college, had never been deer hunting. So my friend Bob, my roommate and friend Bob, I'll call him today, got our hunting licenses. I had a 30-30 Winchester my dad had given me. He passed in 1973, but I'd never deer hunted ever, not with him or otherwise. So this was my first deer hunting trip. Bob and I went to a little lake called Fur Lake on Big Meadows Road above Marion Forks, which is east of Detroit, about 30 minutes. We hiked in. It's only a mile hike into Fur Lake. I'd been there many times in the summer fishing and swimming. Beautiful little place to just hang out. But it's open for deer hunting, and there's actually a deer camp on Big Meadows Road that's available, and it's always occupied in the fall by hunters. So I figured, without knowing any better, good place to start. So we got up there in the afternoon, hiked in, set up our little camp right on the shore of the lake, tried fishing for a little bit, decided we'd wait till the next day to go hunting, and just kind of hanging out. Bob had brought 2 cans of chili. I'd forgotten my food bag, so that was all the food we had. So he's getting ready to heat up the chili for dinner, and I'm just kind of hanging out. And all of a sudden he jumps up and goes down to the lake, and he's pointing across the lake, and there's a big old buck standing on the shore, the opposite shore. And it's not a very big lake. Fur Lake's, I don't know, maybe 20 acres. So there's a big buck standing over there, and we're moving around, and it's not leaving. There's maybe half hour of daylight left, and Bob grabs his gun and starts making his way around the lake shore to see if he can get a shot at this buck. And I just stayed in camp. I don't know why, but I didn't go. I figured if I heard a gunshot, I'd go help him out. So he takes off. And as soon as he's around the other side of the lake, of course, the buck goes back into the woods. And then I see Bob standing about where the buck was, and he goes off into the woods too. And, like I said, not much light left, and it's getting darker and darker, and Bob doesn't come back. And I'm starting to get worried. Then it gets dark, and Bob is still not back. I didn't remember him taking a flashlight with him, but I didn't think he had one. It's pitch dark, and it was overcast, and there's no moonlight. And I don't know, maybe about an hour after that, still no Bob, but I hear 3 gunshots. I'm figuring it's Bob firing his gun 3 times. So I grab my 30-30 and I do the same thing. I fire 3 shots, thinking he needs to at least figure out which location or direction I am. So I do that. I don't hear any more gunshots from Bob, and he doesn't show up. I tried staying up with the fire stoked till, 11 or 12 o'clock at night. Bob hasn't come back. So, and again, this is the absolute first night I've ever spent alone in the woods. So I got a tent there, and I'm in my tent. I remember bringing my axe and my hatchet and my machete, my gun, everything in the tent with me, like I'm going to go to war with the wilderness that night. But I fall asleep. And again, Bob hasn't returned. I wake up in the morning, and the fire was there's still coals in the fire. I stoked it up, got it going. Wasn't too far long after daylight, and here comes Bob up the opposite shore into camp. And he looked pretty bad. He's got sticks sticking out of his hair. He looks pretty rough, like he'd been through that. And he tells me that, yeah, he had followed that buck into a clearing, and it had crossed the clearing, kind of a swampy area, actually on the trail into the lake itself. He had to go off trail a little bit to keep following it, but he said that it had gone across this little marshy area into the woods, and he was sitting there at the edge of the woods waiting for it to come back out. And he told me there was still enough light on the meadow area, swampy area, for him to see, pretty good. But as it got darker, when he turned around to head back to camp, of course, the forest had swallowed the trail. The darkness had swallowed the trail, and he wasn't able to figure his way back to camp. So he had some matches. I think he said he had a can of chewing tobacco, no food or anything, of course. He did have his jacket on, so he wasn't completely exposed. So he had enough sense to get a little fire going right there where the trail had ended into the clearing. And he got the fire going and just stayed by the fire for the rest of the night. So here's the strange part. He said he woke up about maybe said a couple hours before daylight, so it must have been 2 or 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And he had been laying on the ground with his face on the ground. And when he opened his eyes and sat up, there's a dead rabbit a couple feet from his fire. The fire's almost died out. And he says, there's this rabbit. For one thing, I have never seen, I've been Googling a little bit. There are rabbits in the Cascade Range, but I backpacked and, camped, like I said, all my life up there. I've never seen a wild rabbit on the west side of the Cascades. Jackrabbits on the east side, but on the west side, I have never seen any. So anyway, there's this rabbit laying there. Its neck is broken, and whatever killed it had stepped on it or squished it so hard that one of its eyes had popped out. And Bob said he was immediately, disturbed by this. Not only what left it, but whatever left it, where is it at? So needless to say, he didn't sleep anymore that night. Had his gun at the ready, got his fire going more so he could see into the woods as much as possible. And he brought it back to camp with him when he got up that morning and came back to find me. And that was the first thing I asked him. I said, was that the 3 gunshots killing that rabbit? He says, and then he told me, no, something left it for me. And then he had decided that maybe he just hadn't noticed the rabbit when, he had stopped and started and made the fire. And then he'd go back to saying, no, that's impossible. I had that fire going good and I could see around me plenty to know. I would have noticed it. So we decided that something gifted him that rabbit for whatever reason. We still don't know. So that was pretty strange.
Yeah, your buddy Bob is one of the luckiest individuals I've ever heard of on this show.
Right.
I mean, there are so many ways that could have gone horribly wrong.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. And I challenge anyone to come up with a logical reason why there should be a rabbit right there with a broken neck and a eye that's popping out of its head. I mean, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it was quite gruesome looking,
Mm.
And then as a souvenir, Bob cleaned it. We didn't eat the rabbit, but he cut off and cured and kept one of the rabbit's feet, for good luck. I figured.
Right.
He's like, yeah, he felt the same way. He was kind of deciding, well, maybe it was a cougar or maybe it was a bear. I don't think we talked about it possibly being Bigfoot at all, but that's pretty unusual for a bear or a cougar to come into your camp and leave you a present like that. There's a little lake just before that called Fay Lake, F-A-Y. Both of them, Fay Lake is accessible by car, and I've heard of people having some strange things happen there. I've never camped right at Fay Lake, but Fur Lake I've been going to since 1973, and it was always a favorite place to go, especially in the summer for swimming and good fishing there. And it's only a mile hike, so it's popular for people who don't like to go far but kind of get away from it all.
So Fur Lake, did you still go to that same lake then after this time out there with Bob?
Many times.
Wow.
Yes, many times. Yeah. I haven't been there for a while, but for a few years, but Fur Lake was always a favorite, and Eight Lakes Basin right there. It's kind of at the foothills of Eight Lakes Basin, and I spent most of my younger years exploring and backpacking just south of Mount Jefferson in that area. So I was well acquainted with darn near every lake in that area. I love bushwhack trout fishing. I became quite good at orienteering when I was young and trusted my skills enough to hike off trail to these lakes that don't have trails. And, so sometimes the fishing was amazing. Sometimes they were void of fish, but it was always an adventure and very rewarding to find these lakes that maybe no one's ever been to.
It took me a while, but I finally found it because I like to follow along with maps during interviews.
Sure.
I did. Okay, so yep, there it is. Turpentine Loop Trailhead. And
Yeah.
yep. Okay. Wow.
Follow Big Meadows Road in there about a mile and a half. And there's a pull out for you to park and hike into Fur Lake.
You know,
So,
so actually, I am gonna have some questions at the very end. I'm gonna let you continue what you would like to bring
okay.
first, but I do have definitely a few questions afterwards.
Very good. So while you have your map out, maybe you can find Harvey Lake. It's in the Waldo Lake Wilderness, would be south of Waldo Lake, kind of up there close to your favorite haunt outside of Oak Ridge. So in see what year was that? 1992. Yeah, 1992. 5 of my friends from work and I went into Waldo Lake Wilderness for Memorial Day. We were going to stay for 5 nights exploring and fishing in Waldo Lake Wilderness. We parked and left got on the trail, ironically, at Skookum Creek Trailhead. So, back then I didn't know what a skookum was. It's very squatchy in there, as you know. You step off the road 10 feet outside of Oak Ridge and you feel vulnerable. So we go into, first night was at Wahana Lake, a big old lake. No good fishing there. So the next day, my buddy Bruno and we scout out Harvey Lake, leaving the other guys at Wahana to see if the fishing would be better there. His first 2 casts, he landed 2 trout over 18 inches. And this guy would die to catch a trout. So he's like, we're moving. So, okay. So we go back and tell the guys, and we all pack up and move over to Harvey Lake. Sadly, once we got to Harvey Lake, stayed 3 nights there, kind of base camped out of Harvey Lake, exploring the area. Spent 3 nights there, didn't catch another fish. But while we were there, if you can get Harvey Lake on your map, right behind it to the west, southwest, there's a small little hill, kind of a miniature little butte that sticks up out of the ground, rises above the terrain, maybe a couple hundred feet. It's kind of rocky on one side, rocky, cliffy on one side, and fairly steep. So back then we just had topography maps. But I could see on the map that, the topography indicated that it was pretty high little hill above everything. I was thinking if we got to the top of that, might be able to see the surrounding area. There's a couple lakes south of there, Kiowa Lake. And I thought, well, we might be able to see down into the basin a little bit from there. So anyway, my friends Sean and I and Mike, Bruno was too busy trying to catch his fish. So Sean and I and Mike, we climbed to the top of this butte. And on the southwest side of this butte, it's cliffy, and there's a lot of loose rock. So we get up there, and I'm looking around, and I look over, and my friend Sean is sitting on his butt trying to push this boulder over the side so it'll roll down into the forest. And this rock was, if I was to take a measurement, if I remember, it was about 5 foot by 5 foot, big old rock, maybe 1,000 pounds of rock. And he's rocking it, he's making it move, but he's not enough to get it to roll. So right or wrong, Mike and I join him, and we get behind it, 1, 2, 3, push. After a couple tries, we break this thing loose. It rolls down the hill, takes out a couple smaller trees, and bam, comes to rest against this old growth Doug fir. I thought it was going to actually take that tree. It was a big rock. Take that tree out too, but it didn't. It just rested up against it. So we were all kind of like, wow, that was crazy. And we milled around a little bit up there, couldn't see much. So we climbed down, and I'm checking out this boulder. And it was pretty much kind of rectangular shape, but it was longer than it was wide. And it's resting against this tree. Did some damage to the tree, but it didn't break it. And that was that. Went back to camp. And actually, we went back to camp and made a sauna out of a tarp and heated rocks in the fire. Oh, it was wonderful. Had a really nice sauna that night. I was nursing a cold, so I couldn't taste or eat, smell anything, which is horrible when you're in the woods. You know, you want to smell the pine trees and taste the fish. We got in the sauna and I was able to taste and smell. And I had the guys bring me my dinner so I could eat it in there. I could actually taste my food. So anyway, we do that and go to bed, get up the next morning, and we're just kind of wondering what to do. Sean wants to go back and tip some more rocks. So we go over there to where we'd been on the little butte. And there's the boulder, but it's been moved. And it's about 10, 15 feet up the hill from where it came to rest of the tree. It's not against the tree anymore. It has been tipped over uphill and rolled over once more, and it's just sitting there. And you can see the damage that it done to the tree now, right? Because it's not resting against it. And my buddy Sean and I are both looking at it like, how did that happen? And he had decided that, well, it was at a strange angle, where it came to rest. It must have just settled when it settled, or the roundup he had all these ideas on how it happened, but none of them fit what we were looking at. It was this 1,000-pound rock boulder. Like I said, it had been rolled back, tore uphill backwards, and then once again flipped again. So we both looked at each other and kind of got a funny feeling, like a real dark feeling about it. Like we were doing something we weren't supposed to, or in an area we weren't supposed to be. Went back to camp. I joined my friend Bruno at the end of the lake and was telling him about it. And here comes Sean with his map, and he's like, let's move. And we had a couple more nights left. And we packed everything up and didn't really make that the reason why we were leaving. But the fishing wasn't any good. So we decided to leave. And I remember being glad that I wasn't there after that. So in 2002, there was a fire there in 1996. In 2002, I was curious about the damage. It burned the whole wilderness. It was a horrible fire. In 2002, I went back in there and stayed at Upper Irmabel Lake, day hiked down into Harvey Lake to check out the damage, just to see it again. I had my fishing pole with me. And I was with a guy named Steve, and I told Steve about the rock, and curiosity got us, and we went around the backside of the hill again to check it out. Now everything's burned. You can clearly see into the forest, like you couldn't before. And rock's still there, hadn't been moved anymore. But I explained to him, and the tree's still there, and the damage to it is not noticeable now because it's been mostly burned, but you can see through the forest enough. There's another little lake that we didn't know was there, or didn't explore, little lake just southwest of that hill. And so we walked through the woods to that and found bear tracks in the mud over there. So that was kind of curious, but very strange, very strange. However that rock got moved, I'll never know. But I remember hearing some stories on YouTube about big boulders being thrown at people, big rocks weighing hundreds of pounds, traveling 50, 60 feet. And of course, my encounter in 1979, it made it logical that maybe, if there was Bigfoot, maybe 2 or 3 of them got behind that rock just to piss us off, or to show their dominance, or to show their position, and move that thing uphill. So, and this was not a slight slope. This is a very steep slope. You had, you're on using hands and boots to get up it. You couldn't just walk up it. You kind of had to lean into the hill and climb it, grabbing onto roots. So it was pretty steep hill.
How close to its original spot was that rock left?
Well, from where it rested on the tree, it was, like I said, maybe it appeared that it had been rolled back down on its back, so to speak, and then flipped once more uphill. So 10, 15 feet maybe.
Oh, okay. Got it. I mean,
Yeah.
still, I'd be right there with you. I mean, man, I'd be thinking like, yeah, this is not the place maybe for us if something can get that big of a rock to just move.
It really did change the way I felt about staying any longer. It felt wrong to be up there knocking that boulder loose. Really, there was no one in danger below us, but just it seemed destructive. But we did it anyway. I'm not saying right or wrong. We did it, and it alerted someone or something, right, to our presence for sure. We weren't thinking Bigfoot. I didn't stay up that night or think about it or look for it or look for tracks or anything after we noticed it had been moved. I just knew that 10 men couldn't move that rock. No way.
Absolutely. I think this area is still shut down, right? Pretty sure it is.
Yeah,
I think it is.
I think you're right. Yeah. After a fire like that, it's dangerous to be in there. The tree falls are common, especially when the wind comes up. And it's really quite sad. It was such a beautiful area, and it'll grow back, but it wiped out every tree, for miles back in there.
I can't imagine it. That would be absolutely crazy. There is since we're in this area, I ask this all the time, so you probably have heard me ask it. There's another area over there where I heard a lot about this in Oak Ridge at the festival, Sasquatch Summerfest. A lot of people would talk about weird stuff happening around Spirit Lake.
Yeah, I've heard it too.
You've heard that too?
Absolutely.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and Adelio Lake.
I've never heard of that.
It's named after three guys, Ed, D, and Leo. It's a pretty good sized lake across the drain, middle fork of the Willamette drainage or gorge, as you'd put it. And that's a rugged area. The canyon walls in that area are not, it's not walkable. Off the backside of Upper Irmabel Lake, there's a waterfall, unnamed. I invite, your listeners to take a backpack trip in there. Check it out. The outlet to Upper Irmabel Lake, there's a waterfall, a quarter mile on the backside of the lake down the hill. It's 150 feet tall. It's just beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And from there, the canyon drops off practically vertically down into middle fork of the Willamette. So very few people go back up in there. I have a friend who did a kayak trip in there. He's a crazy kayaker. This guy likes to kayak, unnamed tributaries. He's way more adventurous than I am, but somehow he made his way back up in there and almost lost his life due to hypothermia trying to navigate that fork of the Willamette River in the winter in November a few years ago. So that's another story, but not Bigfoot related, but it's very remote and very rugged.
Absolutely. I mean, this area, the area I was in is nothing compared to what's over there from what I've heard. But so regarding Spirit Lake, what are the exact things that you've heard about that area?
Okay, so that guy I mentioned named Bob.
Yep.
He's got a friend named Jeff.
Okay.
Who likes to hunt, and he was not at Spirit Lake, but he was on a road close to Spirit Lake and saw lights in the forest that at first he thought were headlamps off ATV vehicles until they floated above the trees and over the tops of the trees across the ridge away from him.
Boy.
So he thinks it was UFOs. And now, since my interest in accounts from other people has risen, recently, I've been hearing other stories about people seeing lights. But that when you mentioned Spirit Lake, that was the first thing I thought. I thought I should get a hold of Jeff and ask him to elaborate on that story. Unfortunately, he's not on Facebook, and hopefully he's still around, but I don't know if he is or not. I wasn't able to do that.
Absolutely. That is really interesting. So now in this area we have reports of that, but also all the sticks in the lake making a
Yeah,
circle every
yeah.
night, and then the gentleman who was chased out by Sasquatch that looked like it had like dreadlock type hair, which is really unique. But
Yeah.
I've heard it one other time. Super unique. So yeah, that's a weird area, man.
Yeah, when I first started listening to your broadcasts and figuring out that there were quite a few of them were centered around the Oak Ridge area and that you have the festival there, that's really when I recalled to myself, like for the first time in a long time, the rock thing, the boulder thing. I was thinking, well, if I ever do talk to you, I'd like to mention that, even though it wasn't a sighting. You know, I know you have different classifications for sightings, but again, to reduce the possibility of that being done by anything else is basically an impossibility. While we're on the subject of lights in the forest, I would
Okay.
like to include something that happened to me in 1978. I took it with 3 or 4 other friends, 2 of which were professional level mountain climbers, and we were going to attempt to climb Mount Jefferson. I'd never been technical mountain climbing before, you know, with ropes and such. I got a little bit of training from both of them before we went, but we were going to attempt to climb it. It was in August, so you know, good time of year to try it. No snow on the mountain, or not much. So we backpacked in to Jeff Park, which is on the north side of Mount Jefferson, to a little lake called Scout Lake. There were other people camped in the area that were either just backpacking or preparing to climb. We played around for the afternoon, did some boulder climbing in the immediate area to kind of get practice and pass the time. Beautiful weekend to be in the forest. It was, you know, blue sky, no chance of rain, you know, 70 degrees, 80 degrees, whatever. Nice August day. I don't know if we took tents or not, but we decided that it would be a good night to cowboy camp just underneath the stars. You know, it's amazing starlight up there at night. So we spread out on a kind of flat area above Scout Lake, you know, 10 feet from each other, put our sleeping bags out. I don't believe we made a fire. We had camp stoves, made, you know, freeze-dried food or whatever. And we're retiring early so we could get up. The lead climber, Chris, he wanted us up before daylight, on the trail before daylight, because an attempt at the summit would take all day. He wanted to get up there before the winds picked up, whatever reason. It was his call. So we were in bed that time of year. It doesn't get dark till 10 o'clock. I can remember still being a little bit of light, you know, in the horizon. Laying there on my back, I remember having my hands behind my head. Everybody's talking back and forth. One of the guys there was a member of Greenpeace. He was telling us about his adventures, save the whales type thing. And something crazy happened, Jeremiah. I'm laying there, and all of a sudden, the entire campsite, at least enveloping all the guys, you know, that were laying on their bags there, my entire campsite lit up in bright fluorescent flashbulb intensity light. Like someone had turned on a switch and there was a spotlight shining on our camp. So as soon as I noticed it, of course, I sat up in my sleeping bag, and the first thing I did was put my arms out in front of me. And I remember thinking, if I can see a shadow, I'll be able to tell where the source of this light's coming from. So I put my arms out, my hands are spread, fingers are spread, but there's no shadow. There's nothing my underside of my arms, everything is enveloped in this light, and I can't tell where it's coming from. The really strange thing about it is I couldn't tell you if it was on for 10 seconds or 10 minutes or 2 hours. I don't know exactly the duration of what I was witnessing occurred. And then it went completely dark again, right? Just turned off. My friend Larry, he was the closest to me. He's up out of his bag with his little flashlight now turned on, and he's looking around camp, outside of camp. Why, I don't know. He figured somebody was standing there with a spotlight, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like anything that you could write off as being man-made. It was completely bizarre. Again, something like that you'd think would rattle all of us enough to not sleep at all, but we did sleep. Got up at the right time. Chris was waking everybody up. We got on the trail, and from Scout Lake, there's another little lake by it called Bays Lake. We went right by the shoreline of that lake on our way to the lower flanks of the mountain. There's 2 or 3 guys camped right by on the shore of Bays Lake. So I went off trail down into their camp while these guys kept going up the trail. I wanted to know if these other fellas had seen anything. So I went and asked them, did you guys see any bright lights last night? And they both looked at each other and at me and, shook their heads. No, we didn't see anything. One of the guys said, we were up after dark. They asked me what time I thought it was when it happened. And I told them, and they again said, nope, we didn't see a thing. So I rejoined my friends, and we got on the lower flank, a snowfield heading up Mount Jefferson. And down the hill comes this, down the snow field comes these 2 rescue guys with rescue outfits on, telling us, I don't know if it's a good day to go to the top. There's a dead guy up on top on the summit, and we're in the process of trying to recover his body, which really shook me. I thought, wow, you can die climbing this mountain. And they said it was a lightning strike from the day before, or a couple of days before. He'd gone missing, and that's where he ended up dying on top. So that didn't deter my friend Chris. Out of curiosity or whatever, determination, we kept going. So we continue up the snowfield. We all have ice axes with us in case, you slip and fall. You can do that arrest maneuver to keep yourself from sliding all the way down the mountain. Anyway, we all have our ice axes out. I'm the 3rd one in line. Larry, my friend Larry's in front of me. Chris is leading us up the snowfield. And I asked Chris, I said, dude, what do you think those lights were? And I didn't even finish my question to him. And he stops and turns around, and he's shaking that ice axe at me saying, shut up, Joey. I don't even want to hear about it. That's not what we're here for. And that's not a concern right now. Something to that effect. Turned around and kept going. And I was like, okay, man, okay. We eventually made it up to the saddle before you get the final ascent up to the top. And we rested there. And honestly, I was too fearful to go. It was getting technical, and there was some exposure involved with the next thing we did. So I decided I didn't want to attempt to go to the top. Chris kind of was disappointed in me, and he goes, if you're not going, then none of us are going. And we turned around and came back. Didn't talk about it anymore. Spent one more night in the same place. That following night, I was sitting up waiting for it to happen again. Of course, it didn't. And that's the end of that story. We hiked out, and never talked about it again. Very strange.
I wonder if there's almost a form of missing time in that as well, when you're like, you couldn't remember how long it actually lasted for with those lights.
I can't. And I feel this real deep sense of frustration when I ponder that, not the duration of how long it was on. If I could guess, I would say just a few seconds, but I don't know. I don't know. I contacted, maybe not immediately, but a year or two later, I contacted Oregon State University somebody there, meteorological department or something. I can't remember exactly. And I asked them what they thought it would be. I told them there was no clouds in the sky. You know, you can hear about static lightning. One guy proposed that maybe it was a meteor, you know, or sometimes that'll light up the ground if it's close enough. But the guys in the next camp didn't see anything. It was like it was just isolated to our camp. And it did feel like that when I sat up. It seemed like, you know, the light was just encompassing the area we were all in, but outside of that, it was still dark. So trippy.
Absolutely. I think, man, you know, it's one of those accounts where, you know, you almost wonder what would have happened. Excuse me. What would have happened if you'd kept going? But it almost feels like you made the right call, you know?
Yeah, I would have been okay with the rest of the guys completing the summit climb. There were actually other people on the summit, I suppose, attending to the fellow who, you know, had lost his life. He was still up there. Couldn't see from there, but couldn't see him. But you could tell that it was occupied by more than one person. I would have been fine. I wasn't really experienced enough to go back down on my own, but I remember feeling relieved when Chris said, "We've gone far enough today." And we stayed there at the beginning of that saddle across to the summit for half hour, 45 minutes, just taking in the view. Nobody was talking much. One of the guys on that trip, my friend Todd, him and I talked about, you know, those lights for years. Him and I did lots of backpack trips together after that. And we, you know, always came up whenever we were back in the woods together, you know, what was that? But never really came to any conclusions. Of course, he thought it was a UFO and we'd been abducted. And I don't even include that in my account. It's just a complete mystery to me. And that's as far as I care to comment on it.
But it brings up a good point where, you know, usually individuals that have, you know, Bigfoot experiences, they're also, I would say 99% of the time, they are going to have other things they've experienced too, whether it be strange lights or maybe even what can be considered paranormal things.
Yeah.
More often than not, yeah, you've got other things that go on in your life besides the Bigfoot stuff. So I don't know what the connection is there, but it's very interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. So before I get to my really exciting encounter, there is one other thing I want to mention briefly. On a bushwhack trout fishing trip in Three Sisters Wilderness.
Okay.
In 19, see what I have here, 1980. Yeah, about 1980, I guess. My friend Nick and I did a bushwhack trip into a lake called Boot Lake. It's off trail about a half a mile east of Cliff Lake in the Mink Lake Basin. Beautiful little trout lake. I'm not afraid to mention the name because unless you have orienteering skills, you're never going to find it. It's not very big. It's very rugged terrain. And the likelihood of it becoming a popular spot are very unlikely. So anyway, we'd been in there. No, actually, this was the first time we'd been to Boot Lake. I'd been back after that a few times because of the fishing is good. So this is the first time we went into Boot Lake from Cliff Lake, went east up a boulder field into Boot Lake. I was so happy to find it. And it was very deep at one end. My favorite thing to see when I find these lakes, you know, because that's an indicator of some good trout habitat. So we make camp on top of this little hill. There's a tombstone-shaped rock right in the middle of the campsite with a fire ring around it, but some of the rocks have been scattered. No sign of anyone being there for a long time, except for an ancient weathered Folgers 1-pound coffee can that looked like somebody had used to boil or cook in, and a deteriorating little fire grill, like the kind it was square, like you'd see like on a barbecue, like a cheap barbecue. So there's those two things. It was only two things that were any evidence of someone being there. We thought that was pretty cool. Like, wow, this is great. And my guess was right about the trout fishing. The first cast I made into that lake, I landed and released brook trout over 20 inches, which is huge for a brook trout. So that still is one of the biggest trout I've ever caught, brook trout. Anyway, so we fixed up the fire ring, made a fire that night, had a little Yukon Jack. My friend Nick and I just so happy to be in the forest. And I'd left the coffee. I wanted to take the coffee can and the little grill with me. Just for one thing, it was, it didn't need to be there, and it wasn't part of the natural setting. So I was going to remove it. I had it sitting off to the side of the fire ring a little bit. I had the coffee can on top of the grill just sitting there. We go to bed that night. I get up the next morning and the coffee can and the grill are gone. So I start looking around, think we didn't hear anything that night. No, don't remember even hearing deer come into the camp or anything. And there's a lot of black bear in that area, but right or wrong, bear bagging my food and all that, or being bear wary, is not something I'm very good at. I don't do any of that. I don't take peanut butter sandwiches in the tent with me, but we didn't do anything to prevent animals from taking anything. Nothing else was disturbed. Our packs were still where they were. So looked around for a while and couldn't find the can or the grill. So just kind of wrote it off as being strange. That afternoon, Nick and I followed the outlet creek, which is dried up that time of year, just a creek bed. It went down the southeast side of the lake into another lake called Waldo Lake. About a quarter mile down the hill, the creek outlet from Boot Lake met up with another tributary coming from another direction. Both are all dried up now. But they joined down there and a few hundred yards short of Waldo Lake, and then continued into the lake from there across a marsh. So we stopped there for a second. I was going to look for animal tracks in the dried mud there where the two creeks came together. It was quite a large little area of dried mud. And I'm looking in the creek bed and I hear my friend Nick go, "Check this out." And I turn around and he's holding up the coffee can. So I was like, "Oh, there it is." We didn't find the grill, but there's the coffee can. How it got down there, I don't know. It could have been a bear, but why would a bear come into camp and take that old coffee can that's been there forever and not try to get into our packs? We had lots of goodies in there. I'm sure it would have been more interesting than an old coffee can. But that's what we decided, that a bear had come. And my friend Nick, I remember him saying, "Well, maybe the scent of your hands is on that can." And, he just took off with it. Didn't seem likely. But where was the grill, and why? How did the bear carry the grill off, right? I mean, that's so weird. Didn't seem likely that it would. Yeah.
That's one of those, it makes you wonder, man. It's like, and just the weird timing, like you're like, I'm gonna take these. No, you're not.
Exactly.
Oh man, that is weird.
Okay, so thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'd like to move on to, and I'll try not to take so long in telling all this, I'm sorry. In 1979 was my first Bigfoot sighting. It was on Labor Day weekend at Silver Creek Falls YMCA camp. It's a group camp complex within the boundaries of Silver Creek Falls State Park. Every year my church had a family camp there during Labor Day weekend, Friday night through Monday. And I grew up in First Christian Church since I was just a little guy. Still am a very involved member of First Christian Church. So I'm 19 years old and working at the cannery. I couldn't go up on Friday, so I waited till Saturday to go up with my friend David, who him and I were both on the gymnastics team in high school together. He's 2 years younger than me. His parents previous year had died in a plane wreck on North Sister, a horrible, horrible accident. And after that tragedy, I kept him under my wing, and we were very good friends. So anyway, I invited Dave to come along with me, which he did. We got up there on a Saturday morning, and all of the cabins had been taken by families in the main area down by the swimming pool, which was fine because there was another complex on the side of the hill called Hillside that had 8 or 10 cabins, but wasn't being used by anybody in our church. Our pastor told us, Pastor Shiro told us, guys, go ahead and, if you want, go ahead and grab a cabin over there, which we thought, that's great, cool. So we went over in my car in the afternoon and found a cabin about halfway up the hill, unrolled our sleeping bags on bunk beds across from each other. It was a screen enclosed cabin. It didn't have solid walls. So from chest high up to the roof, it was just a screen on the outside, which they closed up with boards in the winter, if you can get a picture of what that might look like. Rolled out our sleeping bags and, set up our little deal there. Went back down and spent the evening with church families, had dinner and music and, all that. It was a lot of fun. About 10 o'clock or so, Dave and I went back to our cabin, went inside and sat on the floor between our bunks and played cards for a while. And I'm thinking it was maybe 11 or 12 o'clock when we finally crawled into our bunks and fell asleep. And woke up right at first daylight to what I thought was a squirrel or a bird eating pine cones and dropping pieces of pine cone on the roof. It was a tin roof cabin. I could hear something hitting the roof of the cabin and rolling off, boom, 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 down the roof onto the ground. So I woke up, and a few seconds later, I realized it's not a pine cone. That sounds like a rock. And one of them hits the roof on Dave's side, rolls down his side of the cabin, dunk, 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 onto the ground. And I'm kind of thinking, that's really strange. So I sit up again, and then 2 rocks, one right after another, hit the cabin. One of them sounded a little bit bigger than the other. Boom, 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 onto the ground. And now I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I get out of my bunk onto the floor. And since the rocks are falling off that side of the cabin, I go over and put my arms up on Dave's bunk. He's still asleep. And I'm looking out, trying to see if I see anything, but it's just barely light enough to see. And I don't notice anything. And Dave is awake now, kind of like, what are you doing? And I told him, something's going on. And just as I'm saying that, I hear something flying through the air. You could hear the sound of it whooshing through the air, and it's a rock, and it hits a fir tree outside the cabin, maybe 30 feet out from the cabin, about 30 feet up, and smashes the bark on the tree and falls to the ground and rolls down the hill. Big rock, maybe the size of a big grapefruit. When we later recovered it, my buddy Dave took it home as a souvenir. It weighed 16 pounds. So it was a big rock. And it was thrown with such force that, like I said, you could hear it flying through the air before it hit the tree. And now we're really awake and wondering what was going on. And if someone's pranking us, my mind can't make sense of what's happening. If someone's pranking us, how did they propel that rock like that? And are we in danger right now? So we're looking out, and we're still in the cabin. Dave hasn't gone outside the cabin yet. We're looking out the window, and another rock comes rolling down the hill, a bigger one, like a basketball-sized rock, rolls past the cabin and continues down the hill. And without warning, Dave jumps out of his bunk. He's just got on his shorts, no shirt, no shoes, and goes out the screen door and runs up the hill trying to figure out who's doing this. And I stayed at the cabin, but I moved from looking out the window to the back of the cabin so I could see if Dave saw anything. And just before that, I had yelled thinking that it might be my friend Kelly. He was one of my best friends at church. I thought, for some reason, is he out here doing that? And I'm like, hey, Kelly, is that you? What are you doing? No answer, of course. So Dave's running up the hill, and above the cabin, maybe 100, 150 feet, the clearing ends, and it's old growth rhododendron bushes up there and old growth, fir trees, forest, thick forest. He's getting close to that, and something catches my eye, and off to the right, I see my first Bigfoot come up from behind a rhodey bush, maybe 6 foot tall rhododendron, and it's standing up, and it pushes the bush down next to it and steps over it. I saw its leg come up. I saw its arm holding the bush down, and it steps over it, and it's gone into the forest. And I'm speechless. I know others can understand that have seen a Bigfoot the first time. I was in shock. I felt vulnerable. I was amazed, at what I had seen. And Dave is still milling around up there. He didn't say anything, and he comes right back and comes in the screen door, and I grab him by both shoulders. I said, we need to get out of here. I just saw Bigfoot or something like that. We need to get out of here. And we grabbed our stuff the best we could and threw it in my car and went up to the the community center hall. Nobody was up from my church yet. It was very early. There were some cooks in the kitchen making breakfast. We waited there until people started coming in, and one of the first to come in was my pastor. And we immediately told him what had happened and what I had seen. And he was looking at us kind of side-eyed, like, okay. We didn't go back immediately, but later, Dave had forgotten his jacket. We didn't know what else we'd missed, in the hurry. So we had the pastor go back there with us and retrieve the jacket and look around a little bit. We found the big rock that had rolled past the cabin. We found the rock that had hit the tree, and it left a good sized mark on that fir tree that it hit. It was quite incredible. It, down to the underbark. It was crazy how the force that it would have taken to do that. So we climbed back up the hill, and Pastor has got this 16-pound rock in his arms. We're walking up the hill and don't find any tracks. Of course, it's just all kind of, the forest up there is mostly fir needles and duff. There's no way you're going to find a footprint, especially in August. So we walk up behind the first kind of set of rhododendron bushes. We're kind of spread out looking around. I was over in at the bush where I'd seen the Bigfoot stand up, looking in there, nothing, And Pastor says, hey guys, come here. So we go over to where he is standing, and he says, check this out. And there's a hole in the ground there. And he takes the rock that he's got in his hand and he sets it down inside this hole, and it fits perfectly. And what I remember giving me the chill was he set that rock in the hole. It fit perfectly in the hole. And the watermark, you know how a rock buried kind of halfway in the ground, when you pull it out, it's lighter on top and dark, moist or wet underneath. The watermark on the rock matched up perfectly. And Pastor made the comment, whoever pulled this out of the ground did it, they just pulled this out of the ground easily. There's no marks or where you and I would have to take a shovel, Jeremiah, to get dislodge that rock. It looked like somebody just reached down and grabbed it with their hand and twisted it a little bit and pulled it out. And then stepped a few feet. You could almost imagine where they threw it from, which was a good over 100 feet, I'd say, from that bush, the first rhodey bush, to the tree that it hit. So I don't know what the world record is for a shot put, but I know it's not 100 feet. So that kind of spooked us. And it spooked Pastor too. And, I wanted him to explain to us. And he didn't have an explanation. He didn't say, well, there's some dangerous people up here. or it being caused by anything man-made. No mention of a Bigfoot. And he said, well, maybe what you saw, was actually a Bigfoot. He did say, if it wasn't a bear, this thing was not it was not a bear. It was not a bear. It stood up. It wasn't light enough to see any features except for the size of it. And I don't know how tall it was. It was as broad as it was tall. It was massive. Like I said, I'd never seen anything like it. And I didn't feel safe. I was still inside the cabin, and I felt like, and the more I thought about it, the more it scared me. Like, I felt like it could have come right up to that screen window and seen us sleeping in there because we were on the top bunks. At any moment, it could have just reached through that screen and grabbed me, easily. Or it could have thrown that rock through the screen and hurt us. So obviously, my conclusion was that these things are smart and cunning and creative and curious and dangerous. I've heard that they can be. I figured that perhaps they're dangerous if you threaten them in a violent way, if you shoot at one, like any animal. But it had every opportunity. It could have just walked through the door and grabbed us. There's no lock on the screen door into the cabin. So sadly, my friend Dave, he kept the rock as a doorstop. He didn't like talking about it much. It scared him. But he kept the rock for many years. We'd always kind of poke fun at it when I'd go to visit him. He passed away back in 2010, sadly. So I'm the only survivor of that story. But yeah, so in an instant, like many have said, I went from, I don't know if I was a non-believer, but I was a skeptic, to a full-blown, they're real type proclamation.
How many seconds do you think it was that you'd actually seen it, like behind, I think it was behind the bush and it stepped over the bush, right?
I didn't know it was behind the bush until it stood up when Dave had gotten up to the first kind of set of rhododendrons there. And he was maybe 50 feet to the left of it. He didn't hear a thing. And I can't say I heard it either. I didn't hear anything. But my attention was immediately drawn to the right of him when it stood up and put its arm out to hold the bush, next to it. It was like he was pushing it down so he could step over it. And that's what he did. He took his, I guess it would have been his left leg, and stepped up over this bush and spun around so his right leg followed him, and then off into the woods. So I didn't see it for more than, all that happened within 3 or 4 seconds from him standing up, making the move, and disappearing into the woods, just leaving me there with like, holy crap.
Wow. And it's a thing where, so you did not see like facial details, but were you able to tell like if it was covered with hair and length of hair at all?
It was real dark still, but it looked black.
Okay.
It looked black and covered with hair. I'm assuming that it was, but sadly, it wasn't a little lighter out. I would have loved to got a better look at it now. I can say that. I don't know about actually being there and wishing that on anyone. But yeah, not much detail, just the size of it stood out. I could see definition, how broad it was, and then how quickly and quietly it moved away too was surprising. You'd think you would, hear something, but I didn't.
That, and so this state park is one that I've looked into before. It's an interesting state park just because it's in an area where, Silverton is to the north, which has a lot of accounts there. And then you've got Molalla, Colton, but it's the biggest state park in Oregon. It almost was a national park, actually, but they shut that down in the 1920s. It never passed.
Right.
But there's actually other reports in that state park of visuals, which is interesting. If you look around, you can find them. It's on the BFRO and stuff like that. But
sure. So, there was, it's just curious because, I see a lot of the expeditions to look for Bigfoot, Todd Standing and Les Stroud, all those guys, they're in these ultra remote locations,
Right.
that you and I can't get there. And they're looking for them up there. But both of my sightings were, there was 150 people at that family camp, not right there on the hillside complex where Dave and I were, but altogether, there's people running around all over there all day long.
Mm.
And then my second sighting, same story. I'll go right into that now so I don't keep you too long here, Jeremiah.
Sure.
It was at Detroit Lake in 1995 on the 2nd of July. My birthday's 4th of July. And it was on the island at Detroit Lake, Piety Island, at the boat camp there. I was there with my friend Steve and his girlfriend were in my camp. We had taken a campsite furthest up the hill away from the other people that had come out there. There was about a dozen of us that had come out to boat camp. I had a jet ski, and we'd done this several times right there. They do the fireworks at Detroit Lake on the 3rd, so it was always fun to celebrate my birthday and to see the fireworks there, swimming and fishing and whatnot. So on the 2nd of July, I had just finished kind of partying and hanging out in a campground down on the beach with my friend Sean and his girlfriend, several others. That was kind of the meeting place for everybody on that trip. And my friend Steve and I and his girlfriend Nancy returned to our campsite. It was pretty late. Not really sure what time, maybe 11, 12, I don't know. They went right to bed. Our tents were set up next to each other. They went to bed. I wanted to wind down a little bit. I'd build up the fire in our fire pit. Had a established fire pit there, cement with the metal swinging grill, and had my sleeping pad laid out by the fire. Didn't have a camp chair, so I'm laying there with my head in my hand up on my elbow on my side, watching the fire, and I had my friend Steve's dog Susha, big old chocolate lab, laying by me. I was kind of using her kind of like a pillow. Very cool dog. I want to add right now that this dog, whether it loved deer or hated deer, I'm not sure, but if a deer was anywhere around our camp, whenever we went camping, she was out of there chasing it. It was almost a problem because sometimes she'd be gone an hour or two. We always wondered if she was going to come back, and she wouldn't bark or anything. She'd just be laying there 1 minute and the next second just take off like a rocket. We knew what she was after, right? So she's laying there by me, and my fire was dying down. So there wasn't much flame left, but there was plenty of smoke coming up off the fire. And that was one of the advantages of laying on that pad. If it blew my way, it kind of just went over the top of me and didn't get into my eyes. So anyway, I'm laying there, and Susha's at my head, like I said, and she lets out a little growl, kind of a low growl, and goes on alert. So she's sitting up now and kind of looking up the hill from me. And I was checking her out to see where she was looking at, but she hasn't taken off. And I was wondering, well, if it's a deer, how come you're not chasing it already? And I hear a stick break, big stick break, and very close to camp. And it made a crack. I mean, it sounded like a big stick you would put over your, knee or stomp on to break it. But it got my attention. And now Susha's very worried and whining a little bit about it. And so I have a pen light on my keychain in my pocket, one of those little flashlights you screw closed to make the light come on. So I get that out and I turn on the light, and the battery in it's real crappy, but it's still making some kind of light. And I kind of get up on my knees and I'm shining it through the smoke and up the hill above my camp there, see if I can see anything, kind of at ground level where you might see a deer. And something catches my eye, and what I see is I raise my flashlight up, And from behind the tree behind camp, maybe 10 feet behind the fire ring, I see one glowing eye. I don't know if it was red or yeah. I think it must have been. I remember it being a yellow glow, but big. This eye peering out from me behind the tree. And, my mind's going nuts right now. I can't figure out what it is. So I stand up, and I wasn't really afraid yet. I had to figure out what this was. I wanted to figure out what this was. So for whatever reason, I stepped right across the fire, right across the grate, through the smoke, towards this thing, so I can get a better view of it, so the smoke isn't in my way. And as soon as I get across it, it goes behind the tree and comes out on the other side. Now I see both eyes looking at me. And it's big. And I know what this is now. I can see the outline. It's facing me. I can see the outline of its left side. It's not all the way out from the tree, but I can see it plainly. That I'm standing right in front of a Bigfoot. And as soon as it's blinking at me too. And as soon as I see it in full view, it squats down like, it's like the call of nature. It squats down and puts its hands out in front of me, or out in front of it on the ground. And I've still got my light and my arm extended completely out in front of me. And I'm shining my light right on its eyeballs. And I can see it, and it's massive. I don't know how tall it was. I never measured it, but it was a good 9-10 foot tall soft Bigfoot, huge. Seemed like it was even bigger than the one I'd seen in 1979. And it's squatted down. It's completely broad. It's just massive. And a couple seconds later, and I'm just frozen there with my flashlight. A couple seconds later, it starts moving away from me down the hill towards the beach. And Susha has taken off. She's nowhere to be seen. She didn't bark, or she decided she didn't want any part of this thing. And it moves away from me. And while it's moving away, it's standing up and squatting, going up and down, up and down. And it kept its eyes on me the whole time. And it got down the hill from me 30 or 40 feet, still looking at me. And all I can see is the eye shine. And it got to a point where it was the angle of the hill, it was going to disappear. And I got the creeps. Like I became, now I'm ready to act. And I went from my fire pit to my tent in about a half a second. I just dove into my tent, breathing heavily. I was petrified at what I'd just seen. Susha's nowhere in sight. I jumped in my tent and grabbed my sleeping bag and put it over my head like a child hiding from a monster in his bedroom. That was my protection, was that thin-walled tent, my sleeping bag. And I'm on my hands and knees with my bag over my head, and I don't know how long I stayed like that, just hoping that whatever happened, that it didn't come back and, kill me. I felt like when it moved away from me, it might be trying to come around behind me, which is why I acted and ran to my tent. So strangely enough, after all of that, I fell asleep and woke up kind of panicky and sat up in my tent thinking, was that what I saw? Was that a dream? No. Poked my head out the tent, and Susha had come back to camp and was walking around in front of my tent a little bit. I called her into my tent and zipped it up and went back to sleep with her. And I got up real early. I didn't sleep much. Got up real early, got my fire going and some coffee. My friend Sean saw me doing that from the camp down by the beach, and he came up the hill with his coffee cup to get some coffee from me. And I told him what had happened. And he was blown away. He started looking around on the tree. Again, the forest floor was not conducive for leaving any tracks. So there weren't any tracks or anything. Later in the day, I followed a abandoned fire road or whatever that wound around the backside of the island to the top to see if I could find any more signs or tracks. I did not. On top of Piety Island, there's a slash pile of abandoned timber, quite a sizable pile that was never harvested but is still there, moss covered and weathered. And when I got up to the top and saw that, there were some real dark holes inside this pile of logs that made a very creepy feeling standing there looking like there was something in there looking back at me. And I didn't stick around long and went back down to camp. By the time I got back down, there was another family that was camping with us with their kids that had come out in a ski boat. And my friend Sean had told him what I had seen. And this fella shared with me that, well, he was at a Boy Scout camp pretty close to Fur Lake when he was a kid, that their scoutmaster had seen a Bigfoot while he had gotten up in the night, and there was one in their camp at the scout camp, and made everybody clear out the following day. He said it was a surreal experience because not only did he had never heard one before, but to actually have to leave the camp because of one. So he packed up his kids and everything and took off that day on the 3rd of July. He didn't even stay for the fireworks. He felt like he was in danger if we had one right there on the island. I stayed 2 more nights, and I didn't worry about it. On the 3rd of July, there was fireworks going off. It sounds like a war zone there. I didn't think about it that night, and then stayed the night of my birthday on the 4th and went home the 5th, and it didn't really bother me. I guess thinking back, again, I was 10 feet from it or closer when it was squatting down, and I was standing there with my little light. I could hear it breathing, and he could have reached out and snapped me like a twig, and he didn't. He just checked me out for a second, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. It was squatted down before it started moving down the hill. But the way it moved down that hill was very strange, how it stood all the way up and went down almost to the ground, up and down 3 or 4 times before, I hightailed it and jumped into my tent. So there you have it.
Man, I can't imagine going to something like that. That's on an island. I mean, that's the crazy part, because you can't just really get away with it. It's stuck with you on the island.
Yeah. So did it swim out there? I've thought about that too. How did it get out there? I've heard other accounts, especially up in the San Juan Islands.
Yep, I was just thinking about that. Yep.
Yeah. About groups of them being seen on the shores of some of those little islands up there. The only other explanation would be that it walked out there in the winter when they draw the reservoir down. There's a land bridge between the town of Detroit and the island that you can, walk out all the way to the island on.
Okay.
But there's nothing on that island to sustain. There are deer on that island, so I can't say that it couldn't sustain itself there. But it's not that, the island itself is half-mile long, quarter-mile wide. It's not very big. And I don't know what it would be eating to be out there permanently. So I think it was curious about, again, just speculation, but I figure it was curious about all that activity out there and swam out there, which is a pretty good swim from, either side of the lake.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. In maybe if it's used, like, let's say it's used to that area, and this is super, speculation, but like it knows that there's going to be a lot of people on that island around that time of year, and it might be, well, there's going to be more food out here, so maybe I can go around and scrounge some stuff up. I don't know, but
so that was the 2nd of July, and they did the fireworks on the 3rd,
right?
So unless it swam back to the mainland, it was out there for those fireworks too. I can't imagine, a creature like that being okay with mortars going off. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Just things so juxtaposed. Yeah.
So when you saw it, and you were were you able to see? Well, yeah, you were able to see an outline because you could see the side of its body. Could you see an
Oh
outline of
yeah.
its head at all?
Oh yeah. It was very big and black. This one was completely jet black,
Mm.
and my little pen light didn't really give this thing justice, but it was very dark skinned. I can't really say I could tell the colors of his eyes because his eyes were glowing or just as black as the creature itself. But I could definitely see how broad it was. It took my breath away to see how enormous this thing was. And when I first noticed it behind the tree, I'm looking, my light's shining 4 or 5 feet off the ground looking for a deer. And I had to go, I bet it was 9, 10 feet tall.
Wow, that's
And the way it squatted down as if it were just getting down on my level, like, here, let me give you a better look at me. And put its arms out and its hands down on the ground. I could have walked over and shook his hand, but I didn't, of course. And it scared me more later thinking about what could have happened than what did actually happen.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you always think of stuff like that. And it's a thing where, and man, this just came up I just talked to another individual, and it seems like it keeps coming up in interviews lately, is that you have the encounter or the interaction, and then you immediately go to sleep. And why is that? Like, is everyone, you go through that adrenaline, or is there something related to, having that encounter that, like, the person goes, boom, right to sleep? It's so weird.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a defense mechanism or self-preservation
Mm-hmm.
or absolute relief that I survived the encounter and now here I am in my tent. I'm safe. It felt like that. It felt like it was moving away from me when I left the fire ring, and now I'm in my tent. I can't explain it either. You'd think something like that. I mean, I watch a scary movie and I'm up half the night. You'd think that would do it too. But
So thinking
I
about,
just want to
okay.
add.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to add that it's frustrating being in my shoes and knowing what I saw was real both times. And the other things I described to you that could have been possibly an interaction with Bigfoot, especially the rabbit that was left for Bob. These things, it's frustrating to think that anyone wouldn't believe what I'm saying. I'm a Christian, God-fearing man. I'm not gaining anything I wouldn't gain anything by lying about something like this. And why would I? And I do believe that possibly the evidence exists as we speak of the validity and the existence of Bigfoot. I believe that someone has either ran one over, shot one, has great unmistakable video that it exists now, but the fear of ridicule and maybe just the fear of success, I don't know. But it seems logical to think that of all the sightings in all of the places, that somebody somewhere has got some evidence they're not sharing.
No, I agree 100%. And, I don't know if it's just being overly optimistic, but I do think that, yeah, man, sometimes I think, I'm like, man, is this the year? And then I'm like, how
Yeah,
many people in this community have been thinking that since years and years? But I mean, you gotta be optimistic. I mean, there's stuff going on that I know a little bit about, and it's just, there's some wacky stuff going on regarding, and I don't know if it'll come out to anything, but I mean, 2025 could be a really, really interesting year when it comes to Bigfoot. But
agreed.
I do like to ask people, witnesses that do have that sighting, and you were able to see, some definite details from what you were able to see of the creature, specifically like in the face. How would you categorize that? Was it more something that was ape-like, or some form of human, or?
I guess I'd have to say it was a mixture of both.
Mm,
But I will say that the 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 characteristics, the behaviors that I experienced both times, both at Silver Creek and at Detroit Lake, the behavior was an indicative of a human. The way that I believe it broke that stick on purpose to get my attention
right.
on the island, and played peekaboo with me, like, look up here, shine your light a little higher, Joey, and it's blinking at me, and then the nonviolent interaction that I had with it, so close to it, and then the rock throwing at Silver Creek Falls, which could have been deliberate and damaging, but wasn't. Those aren't things that an animal would premeditate. Those are things more indicative of human behavior. Throw in the fact that it's so elusive. Throw in this fact right now. They exist. Then add they are so elusive, so secretive, nocturnal,
Mm-hmm.
move with such stealth and secrecy in the forest. They manipulate every part of their environment that we know very little of to their advantage. So I can't really tell you exactly what I would feel about, are they more gorilla-like or ape-like? I can't answer that. I just think that they're covered in hair and somewhere between a human and an ape, and enormous, potentially enormous. I know there's reports of course, juvenile ones. I feel like the juveniles aren't allowed to wander as much as the adults, and that might be why the frequency of their sightings is less.
Detroit Lake is an area that is well known for sightings beside the one that you have reported, and it's almost the gateway to an area which in the community it's called the Oregon Bigfoot Highway, which is 224 goes up to, let's see, I gotta memorize this. There's two forest roads, and it is Forest Road 46 down to 224, goes through Ripplebrook. It starts up in Estacada and then goes down to Detroit.
So the road that goes up out of east of Detroit that goes by Brighton-Bush Lake.
Yeah.
And then curls around past Horseshoe Lake, Monon Lake, and ends up there at Olally. A real short story about that. I was 22 or 3 years old and took a backpack trip in the spring. Got let out, me and three friends, a couple miles this side of Brighton-Bush Lake, and hiked in and stayed the night at Brighton-Bush Lake, then on to Olally Lake and spent 2 nights there. There's still snow on the ground. And while we were at Olally Lake, I got into an argument with one of the guys in my group, and he just pissed me off. I didn't want to be there anymore. We were supposed to be there 2 more nights. I decided the morning after the argument I was going to leave. So I packed up and left on my own and was going to hike all the way back down to the town of Detroit. So I did that, and I got up over the hill from Horseshoe Lake. I'm on a forest road, but it's covered in snow, and you can see it on the map, the road I'm talking about. And just to be funny, I knew my friends would be along there in the next day or two, so I built a snowman, but the snowman was in the shape of a hand flipping the bird. Okay. Okay, and it was pretty good size, right? And I figured this fellow I was arguing with is going to see that, and he's going to know Joey left this for me. And it was beautiful, man. I had the thumb and everything. And I went down and I got to the end of the forest road down there past Brighton Bush, and there was a guy cutting timber or cutting firewood. And he gave me a ride back into the town of Detroit, and I called my girlfriend, and her and her mom came and picked me up. My other buddies had to hike out and hitchhike. So I didn't care. I was mad, right? So I said, when they got back, I asked the guy I was arguing with, I said, did you see the little present I left you? And he said, I did, and I didn't. He said, did you make a snowman? I said, yeah, I told him what it was shaped like. He goes, oh, something crushed that. There was barely any. So it could have been man-made, or human caused, but that's right in the area where you're talking about. Nobody was up there, bro. It's a relief to be able to share this all with you because, I've talked about the encounters I've had in 79 and 95 quite a few times, but this other stuff is quite satisfying to be able to share it with you today, Jeremiah. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that, you're able to, share that and work through some things. And I think listeners will be able to, hopefully draw conclusions about things they've experienced based on things you shared. And that's kind of how the show works. But I appreciate you coming on the show, Joey. And I'm glad we finally got to talk. And yeah, thank you so much. If anything else, you remember anything else, feel free to reach out. But it's been an enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely. And same to you. I want to thank you for your dedication to everything Bigfoot and keep going, brother. We'll figure it all out someday and we'll celebrate it together.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for chatting, and you have a good one, Joey.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKenzie Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.